its battles done, an ancient cannon is retrieved from the bottom of the sea. Now anonymous in death, an early voyager returns to shore. A net filled with long-lost artifacts is yielded by the sea to the exultant finders. They are small recoveries from the toll taken through history by the great waters, which still claim more than 1.5 million tons of merchant ships each year. In the catalogue of disaster, shipwreck retains a unique hold on men's imagination. The moving sea is a continuing reminder of human vulnerability, the great blank waste which can so quickly erase any sign of man's presence upon it. Yet in the twilight depths, the evidence remains. Ghostly parables of human history scattered across the bottom of the sea. Masts and rigging festooned with sea growth, some ships still seem to sail, strays in the silent gloom. A broken paddle wheel still tells of long past summer excursions. Upon these decks and gangways where crew and travelers once walked, other creatures now make their home. Here plants and fish and animals swiftly enshroud the ship, as elsewhere making their own, the scattered litter of countless voyages, the lost relics of the sea. On the northern coast of Crete, a peaceful visitor, the Calypso, enters the often embattled port of Heraklion. Key to power in the inland sea, Crete repeatedly has changed hands among the warring Mediterranean nations. Around this fortress once swirled a many-sided battle. Held by the Venetians, it was besieged by the Turks, themselves attacked by the Venetian navy with ships of a supposedly neutral France. On July 24, 1669, the Great Fleet bombarded the Turks with devastating effect. But the battle's outcome was abruptly altered by the explosion of the French ship Thérèse, with the loss of 350 men and 70 cannon, causing such heavy damage to nearby sister ships that the fleet was forced to withdraw. Led by a diver's report, the Calypso team descends to see what relics history has left behind. At first, the bottom reveals little more than a metal bowl half buried in the sediment. But now, a curiously encrusted mound rising from the sea floor seems more interesting. It is here that the divers encounter the first grim evidence of the battle fought more than 3 centuries ago. The small, round pellets of grape shot. Unlike cannonballs intended to break masts or hulls, these were designed to kill. Now a diver brushes away the dust to expose the skull of a victim in that long-ago confrontation. One of the French volunteers who gave their lives in a dubious battle in which their own monarch, Louis XIV, maintained close diplomatic and commercial ties with both the Venetian and Turkish antagonists. Darkened perhaps by the explosion itself, the first finds are examined on the Calypso, where divers Albert Falco and Raymond Call tell the Greek advisor Lazar Kalonis the bottom is littered with similar debris. Not only skulls and shattered bones, but also relics such as the knife sharpener dated 1668, a year before the Thérèse sinking.
1 year before the Creta with Arabian.
Yes.
Yes.
Turk.
Yes,
Turk,
Turk, yes.
Turk.
In hope of uncovering even more important finds, possibly even the hull of the Thérèse herself, the great suction tube, the Sisseuse, is assembled and lowered to the bottom to remove the accumulated sediment of centuries. Again, as it edges into the silt and gravel, more bones appear. Sucked up from the bottom, the gravel and sediment are flushed through a strainer hung from the Calypso's side. Later, the team searches through the accumulated debris for hidden artifacts. More jawbones are found, as well as other fossil remains. Even a pocket sundial and a gold coin of the preceding monarch, Louis XIII. Eager to examine the site, Captain Cousteau also descends. Working with the Sisseuse, he gradually exposes increasing evidence of the sunken vessel. At last finds skeletal remains of the hull of the fighting ship. A bewildering array of ribs, planks, and broken pieces, no longer joined in any clearly recognizable structural design. Cousteau returns to the deck, confesses himself baffled by the confused wreckage below. There's shattered wood everywhere, even under the planking used to sheathe and strengthen the inner side of the hull. He reports one find that gives evidence of the explosive force that ripped the Thérèse apart. A brick firmly lodged halfway through a board.
Le bois. Une brique incrustée dans le bois, traversant le bois. Voilà.
Falco's suggestion that they make a cut through to the hold itself, Cousteau quickly agrees. As work continues, Cousteau makes frequent inspections, usually in the mornings when the water is still unclouded by the silt raised by the divers' activity. Bit by bit, the dig reveals evidence of the ship's combat capability, reminders of its batteries of wheeled cannon whose recoil was snubbed by ropes. A large pulley for rigging thrusts out of the debris. A wooden cannon wheel is retrieved by the divers and sent to the surface. Near the frame of what once had been part of a gun carriage, Cousteau also finds a wheel and shattered axle that supported one of the ship's 70 cannon. In a playful experiment, Cousteau finds that the wheel still could function quite well. Now, probing with the scissors, Falco gradually uncovers a heavier object. As he slowly clears away the debris, it becomes increasingly apparent that the object is made of metal, possibly bronze. With assistance from other divers, one end of the embedded object is at last exposed. It is one of the Thérèse's great cannon, still lying in the position where it fell 300 years ago. Laboriously bringing their cameras through a surging sea, the divers return to the Calypso. Still unused in a battle that saw 15,000 cannonballs fired against the Turks, these missiles are released from the mud.
Raconte-nous.
With Albert Falco, Cousteau greets the return of Frédéric Dumas, an old friend, who joined the dive. Obviously, says Dumas, the cannon was violently dislodged by the Thérèse explosion. He then expresses his belief, based on chance reports of earlier removals, that no other guns will be found. Less pessimistic, Cousteau suggests they may be on the bottom still. Though any finds are destined for the museum, Dumas jokingly suggests that the present price of bronze per pound, 70 big guns would bring a big profit in the market. With most of the surrounding debris now removed, a diver is sent below to shackle the gun. At last, on signal, the great weapon begins to move. Forced through an obstructing beam, the 3-ton cannon is slowly raised toward the surface.
Écartez par là, sortez le bras un peu. Dégagez un peu par ici. Par ici. Grosse famille. Ah ouais, montez, écartez un peu et montez. Montez.
Laboriously and carefully controlled, lest it smash against the Calypso, the ungainly burden emerges from the sea, lifted back into a world vastly changed in the interval between its loss and recovery. A world in which even more modern cannon are useful only in limited or little wars. Today it is a museum piece as outmoded by contemporary weapons as the ballista or bow and arrow were once rendered obsolete by the cannon. Heavily encrusted with limestone and copper oxide, the huge gun at last is lowered to a supporting cradle on Calypso's deck.
Amen. Rentre un peu, Jo, encore par là-bas. Doucement. Bien bon, maintenant, doucement, amen. Amen, encore. Allez, ça y est. C'est gagné.
C'est un canon, hein?
Here, amid the self-congratulatory mood that envelops the team, Cousteau himself begins the chipping away of the rock-hard conglomerate that sheathes the barrel. It is only the start of a prolonged process. Hour after hour, the team chisels away the hardened gravel and sand that clogs the barrel, chipping and washing away the accretion of centuries. Slowly, the weapon again takes on its original, precise contours. As the entire team attacks the weapon with chisels and cleansers, hammers, and even electric metal brushes, the gun finally appears as it was. Once more, the bronze glows. Again, the molded designs have emerged. The proud symbols and charms given the gun in its baptism at the foundry, but which failed to save it from defeat. Albert Falco gives a last prideful inspection to the recovered piece, about to take its place in the Heraklion Museum. In the dusk, the Calypso crew also prepares to move on. Seeking to confirm reports of another ancient shipwreck, Calypso is forced to find shelter against an oncoming storm. At last takes refuge in one of the few bays along the island's rocky coastline. While the Calypso stands by, awaiting better weather, the divers deploy along the coastal waters in the Zodiac and launch, prepare for a reconnaissance. Almost at once, as they reach the dark sea floor 110 feet below, the lights reveal a prodigious array of amphoras strewn across the bottom. Used in ancient times to carry oils, wines, grains, and 100 other articles of Mediterranean trade, the elegantly shaped jars are now covered by hydrarians, colonies of red sponge, and other sea organisms. Necks and handles of the jars clearly identify them as first century Roman. With luck, the ship that carried them also may lie buried in the sand. On deck, an exultant Ramon Cole describes the great deposit of artifacts below.
Et longue avec le pied, et là c'est comme ça.
With the return of calmer weather, Calypso has moved closer to the actual site of the discovery. As Falco and the team secure cables at points along the steep, rocky shoreline, Calypso is at last safely moored in her web of lines, directly above the wreckage. Lengths of flat aluminum tubing are now brought by the launch to the broad, stony beach. They are assembled into a large grid, nearly 50 feet long and 30 feet wide.
Oh, papa, non, non.
Si on a dépassé, faut le ressortir un peu. Ouais, c'est bon.
Carefully supported by members of the team, the completed metal frame is now carried into the bay where the launch stands by. With air floats fixed to provide buoyancy, the grid is slowly towed into position alongside the Calypso, above the site. Then, as the buoys are deflated, the metal frame is allowed to sink gradually to the bottom. At rest a few inches above the densely massed jars, the grid is supported by a stanchion at each corner. At last, each square is given a code identification number and the camera support erected. Later, in a conference on deck with Greek advisors Charalambos Kritsas and Lazar Kalonas, Falco interprets the mosaic photograph taken by the camera above the grid. Believing that the ship tilted as it reached the sloping bottom, scattering and breaking the amphoras on the rocks, he speculates that the vessel accordingly may lie slightly to one side of the jars. If any of the hull still survives, he says, it will be found beneath the sand. At this distance in time, any wood exposed to the seawater would long since have disintegrated.
Alors il y aura le problème, bien entendu, de ce que nous allons faire de tous ces morceaux cassés.
Because many of the jars have been damaged or shattered in the wreck, it is decided to remove them square by square, keeping the jars from each unit in a separate container. Later, with each broken piece labeled, the individual amphoras will be restored. Sketched in place with a grease pencil, each amphora, each fragment is tagged before removal. Then one by one, the large symmetrical jars, some of them still almost perfectly intact, are lifted to the surface. Layer by layer, assisted by the chasseurs in pulling away the sand and rubble, the site is gradually cleared of its elegantly shaped treasures. Brought to the deck and there flushed of their contents, some of the amphoras yield surprising evidence of their original cargo, such as the handful of pine nuts, still preserved after nearly 20 centuries buried in the sand. Stored in a hold for transfer to the Greek Museum, the accumulated treasures are carefully sketched by archaeologist Kalonas. On the bottom, the search goes on with diminishing results. With the second layer of amphoras cleared away, the chasseurs has begun to strike a hard, unyielding conglomerate. From a final dive, Cousteau brings two small objects. One he believes to be a nail, the other perhaps a bit of wood.
C'est dur comme du rocher. Moi, à mon avis, c'est un clou de fer. Et comme il y avait un objet de cuivre pas loin, ça a mis...
Despite companion Ivan Jacoletto's momentary optimism, such small petrified fragments are all they ever will find of the vanished hull.
Pétrifié. Parce que dessous, il y a la roche, alors. C'est pétrifié.
Off the coast of southern France, near Gien, the Calypso team visits other searchers who have had better luck. Here a team of the Institute of Mediterranean Archaeology has partially excavated the hull of a pre-Christian Roman ship, first discovered by French Navy divers in 1967 at a depth of 70 feet. In the dim light at the bottom, an extraordinary apparition awaits the Calypso visitors. The positions of nail holes and binding straps clearly marked. The ribs of the excavated Roman hull lie in perfect symmetry. Over 110 feet long, estimated at between 300 and 400 tons, the ship held a varied cargo, several hundred amphoras containing wine, oil, nuts, and even grapes were cushioned against buffeting seas by layers of tree branches. Among the many other items recovered were bricks, mortar and pestle, oil lamps, a bronze scale believed to have come from Asia, a half-dozen snail shells, and a comb for removing lice. Because long-buried wood tissue often quickly disintegrates when brought to the surface, the hull still remains hostage of the sea, awaiting treatment with preservatives. Briefly travelers across the threshold of the past, the Calypso team returns half astonished to the surface and the present. Aboard Calypso, Patrice Paumet, leader of the Institute team, shows Cousteau cross-section drawings of the Roman ship, illustrating structural details of the keel and the step for the mast, securely embedded in the frame of the double-planked ship. A so-called round boat, the sunken vessel conformed to an early agreement among Mediterranean nations requiring cargo ships to have a width one-third their length, thus ensuring that sleeker patrol craft could overtake and examine them for contraband or evidence of piracy. Cousteau remarks that some of the construction methods were used until more recent centuries and even into the present. Paumet agrees, adding that the workmanship is in many ways far superior to that of the ships which came after the Roman. Returning to Dia off the north coast of Crete, the Calypso divers continue their search for other casualties of the sea, this time trying to confirm reports of a more modern Venetian wreck, lost in the 16th or 17th century. Almost at once, at 100 feet of depth, the lights reveal a collection of heavy iron bars or rails on the sandy bottom. Lying as if carefully arrayed in parallel order, they no longer suggest any identifiable function or purpose to the team. Nearby, a diver comes upon a less enigmatic find. A set of copper bowls, still stacked as if ready to serve. Hopeful that the bowls are a promise of other artifacts, though little else was seen, the team now prepares a more elaborate reconnaissance. Suspecting that further traces of the shipwreck may lie hidden in a mound of sand below, Falco decides to use the diving saucer as an instrument in the search. The soucoupe brings with it a useful tool for underwater probing. A water jet, its pump powered from the Calypso. Equipped with a no-recoil muzzle, which aims part of its thrust to the rear, the soucoupe is enabled to maintain a stable position during operations. Using the slope of a bottom to his advantage, Falco moves from the top downward. Thus, the raised particles of sediment fall down the incline, leaving him a clear view of what the jet has revealed. Soon, broken pottery, more copper dishes, and small jars are exposed. A free-swimming diver, Raymond Cole, appears to provide assistance to the soucoupe.
Allô, Raymond,
Each equipped with a sonar radio, Cole and Falco easily communicate.
Tu peux prendre cette pièce-là, devant toi, juste devant toi, dans l'axe de la soucoupe. OK. Celle-là, OK, tu peux la prendre. OK, tu la mets dans la soucoupe.
At Falco's request, Cole retrieves a small amphora from the sand and places it in the carrying compartment, then brings another bowl for transport to the surface.
Allô, Raymond, tu veux prendre là la pièce qui est sur ta droite? C'est ça, c'est celle-là. OK, tu la portes dans la soucoupe. Hein?
Again, Cole moves on, and Falco continues his search with the soucoupe. Soon, as he works his way down the slope, the jet uncovers a cut stone, then more blocks, all clearly hewn or chiseled by human hands.
No Byzantine.
No Byzantine,
No
Greek.
Byzantine. Greek.
Classic Greek.
Classic.
Aboard Calypso, examined by Frederick Dumas and archaeologist Colonnas, the stone is found to be marble.
Another side.
Colonnas further points out that it is not of recent date, but clearly belongs to classical times. Indicates how it may have been fitted in a temple wall with a groove cut to drain off rainwater.
For the water. In Greece, its name is Metopi, of temple.
In the depths below, like the skeleton of a fish, ribs of a hull now have been exposed by Falco and the soucoupe. Near it, he also has found the head of a column, a rounded stone which, with others, is carefully shackled and lifted to the surface. The group on deck speculates on the identity of each recovered piece.
Another piece. Sometimes in this site there is statue.
Yes. Where the stone was staying? It was on top of a temple?
Yes.
Always on the top?
Yes.
Allô, Calypso de secours, recevez-vous.
Oui, j'écoute à vous.
Est-ce que Raymond Cole est par là, s'il vous plaît, Raymond Cole?
A call from Falco on the sonar radio tells Raymond Cole that still more stones have been found. Another team is needed to lift them to the surface.
D'autres arbres, il faudrait envoyer une autre équipe de plongeurs pour les remonter.
Steadily, day by day, more loads of cut stone are winched up from the bottom by Paul Zuena at the crane. Day by day, the seafloor yields more fluted fragments or column capitals, all appearing to belong to the same original temple. But how explain its presence on a relatively modern wreck? Was it simply used as ballast? Or was it, as some of the team surmise, the purchase of some 18th century William Randolph Hearst, importing a Greek temple to serve as a garden pergola or a weekend hideaway? At the bottom, the divers have made a final curious discovery. A twin pair of small bronze cannon or culverins, probably made during the 16th or 17th century in France, and later used in campaigns against the Turks. Attended by the divers, the weapons also make the journey to the surface. Like the stones, the cannon raised questions. Were they carried as armament, or were they too simply a collector's item? But the past remains silent. Whatever the answers, the guns still bring a threat, cause a brief flurry among the finders. At Navarino in western Greece, the old fortress still holds the shore, but in its sunlit bay, Calypso finds few marks of history. Yet in this serene enclosure, the Spartans surrendered to the Athenian navy. Here, 22 centuries later, on October 21st, 1827, occurred the great naval battle by which Greece was reborn as an independent nation. In the murky depths, the lights reveal little as the divers begin their search of the bay's vast burial ground of ships. Because rapid sedimentation has created a thick deposit over the bottom, the divers find it necessary to employ long probes to penetrate the silt. One of the divers finds the gaunt and crusted ribs of an unidentified hull. Elsewhere, another finds the wheel of a pulley, an attachment for rigging. Yet there are few visible remains of the events that twice altered the history of the world. Empty-handed, the team returns to shore, to the Greek villagers who are the living inheritors of the Battle of Navarino. For them, at least, it is still a vivid legend. Here, trying to impose an armistice between rebelling Greeks and their Turkish masters, 27 British, French, and Russian ships faced a Turco-Egyptian fleet of 65 vessels. After a 3.5-hour battle, 60 of the Ottoman men of war had been destroyed without the loss of a single Allied ship. Now, in the dying day, the sea holds little evidence the battle ever happened. Only history has been changed. Again, Calypso's anchor is raised. Again, Calypso sails, this time through the Strait of Gibraltar and westward across the Atlantic. At its destination, the casualties in the sea have been caused not by storm or war or other human error, but by forces stored in the earth itself. From the sea, the French island of Martinique is lush and green. Today from the air, from Calypso's helicopter, Saint-Pierre is a quiet colonial town of 6,000, a small center raising orchids and tropical flowers for export, a few bananas, and sugarcane for rum. To its small jetty come an occasional yacht or sport fishing boat, causing a stir in the town's tranquil life. Yet now below the helicopter, an old ruin appears where a church once stood. Then an empty, ramped space once occupied by a theater. They are scars left by one of the major natural disasters in human history. On May 8, 1902, nearby Mount Pelée exploded. Within minutes, a burning cloud of gases and ash engulfed Saint-Pierre, snuffing out the lives of its 30,000 inhabitants. Above the dead city, the explosion left a sinister monument, a spire of lava which subsequently crumbled.
Ah, tout ça a été rasé.
Tout ça a été rasé.
Led by Assistant Mayor Charpentier, also director of the local museum, Cousteau is taken through the remains of the theater, now, like the ruins of the church, carefully preserved as a memorial to the tragedy that overwhelmed the community.
Le théâtre commençait à partir d'ici.
On ne sait pas combien il y avait de prisonniers, mais on est sûr qu'il y en avait d'autres.
Il y en avait d'autres, oui. Il y a eu
Later, Cousteau is shown a surviving structure, an isolated security cell. Within its thick walls, convicted criminal Cyparis Sampson had been placed for misconduct in the prison, and thus, in a reverse morality fable, became one of the two survivors of the eruption's burning cloud.
Alors voilà.
In the museum, Cousteau finds a photograph of the surviving Samson, who, after his burns were healed and his sins forgotten, further profited from his experience by appearing as an exhibit for P.T. Barnum. Beneath the picture hang the fused bars of the cell that saved him. With Albert Falco, Cousteau views other sad relics of the disaster, a collection of partially melted scissors, a bundle of nails become a single mass, petrified coffee beans, a horn once played in the orchestra of the destroyed theater. A large mural of a photograph taken the day before the Mount Pelée explosion shows the line of ships waiting to load cargoes at the jetties of the then busy port.
Oui, vaguement, ils étaient tous serrés devant la ville, devant les jetées, c'est bien entendu parce que les hangars.
Falco points out the now sunken vessels, which the Calypso divers already have identified. An Italian yacht, several merchant ships, the Gabrielle, the Diamant,
Est venu couler par là, et
the Teresa Lovico.
par là.
Next day, only a single burning cargo ship, the Roraima, remained in the ravaged port.
Ah, Weber, venez voir.
Oui.
Le bateau sur lequel on va plonger.
With much of its superstructure swept away, the Roraima stayed afloat for 2 days.
Il a coulé à la suite.
Then, as the fire aboard reached a shipment of kerosene barrels, the ship exploded and went to the bottom. Lowering the sonar fish or side scanner, the Calypso begins a sweep of the bay in a search for the Roraima, broken in two by the blast that sank her. Aboard Calypso, intent on reaching the lost wreck, Cousteau closely watches the wavering needle on the graph.
Là, il y a quelque chose. Hein?
Gradually, a shape begins to appear on the paper. Studying it, Cousteau remarks that it is the biggest wreck they have found. It is, he and Falco agree, almost certainly the Roraima. Within hours, accompanied by Jacques Delcouter, Falco, Cole, and others, Cousteau leads an exploratory dive to the greatest of the ships lost on that day in 1902.
Once again, we descend. There are 8 of us together, friends and old companions on many a journey in the sea, alien visitors to the element which gave birth to the oldest ancestral forms of life. Now we are explorers of a more recent past, entombed here in the depths where ships lie silent, their journeys interrupted, vessels arriving at a destination never expected, or even listed on their ports of call. At 55 meters, about 150 feet, the bow of the broken Roraima rises toward us from the darkness of the bottom. Its plates now are hardly recognizable, heavily covered with a thick mantle of vegetation, of weeds and sea creatures, such as the Virgularians, the long tail-like spirals of growth, which actually are colonies of living animals. Entering the hull, I find a confusing world which sometimes holds little resemblance to familiar shipboard design. I pass through a curious tunnel stretching toward the center of the ship. It is formed by the crumbled walls and ceilings. Hovering outside again, I sink slowly into the narrow confines of the engine room. All around me lie the fading evidences of man's handiwork. Here are his corroding machines, the barely recognizable chains and ropes and cylinders. Here, too, are the ghosts of forgotten ambitions, loves unconsummated, the dust of victories. In the spilled cargo and rotting hull lies a metaphor of the human journey, of the mischances that threaten us. Yet, almost always, it seems, disaster takes us by surprise. It is with a sense of liberation that I leave the cramped space of the engine room and find myself in the jungle growth of Virgularians, sea worms, and sponges. I pass downward between the supports of a vanished deck, swim along a gangway now buried in the mud. Here, where crew and travelers walked, random fish swim by, alert to our presence, but uncertain whether we offer threat or promise. Everywhere around me lies evidence of nature's thrift, of an economy in which nothing is wasted. Here, life still builds upon catastrophe, raising gardens and flowers amid the ruins and the dead. Here, new forms, new creatures are shrouding man's work with lacy structures, daubs of color, filaments of life. In the deep sediment that covers the deck, I search for a few remaining signs of human presence. I uncover a bone. Then others. Human remains, now somehow more alien than the sea creatures that flourish all around me. At last, I find a melted and twisted glass bottle, record of the deadly heat that ravaged everything. Holding this homely artifact, I am swept away by affection for that distant stranger to whom it belonged, another man surprised by sudden darkness. We begin our return, following the cable upward. Our blood heavily loaded with nitrogen, we ascend slowly, resting at 9, 6, and 3 meters. For an instant, I have the illusion we are climbing through air. The glistening sardines are flights of starlings. The dark hull of Calypso, a dirigible hanging in the sky. Then at last we are at the surface among our waiting companions. Good to see them. Good to see the sun. At Martinique, I visit another mound of legend, still called the Tomb of the Caribs. Here in colonial times, cornered by the French, it is said the Caribs blinded themselves, then leaped to their death, swearing the Fire Mountain would avenge them. Indians once spread through the Caribbean. The very name of the Caribs meant brave, but bravery was not enough. Today, there are no Caribs left on Martinique. Its legendary act of violence done, Mount Pelée sleeps again. Once again, green clothes its flanks, and on the slopes around the town, fruit and vegetation grows. On a more modest scale, life has resumed in Saint-Pierre. Parks flourish over its scars, and children play on the beach. Hidden in the vault of the sea, only a ghostly fire from the divers' torches reveals evidence of catastrophe. On shore, in the shadow of the mountain that once overwhelmed them, people do what they have always done. They go on.